All right, it is a Friday evening, just an hour, or maybe a little more than that, until the NHL entry draft begins, which is normally when all the news that they promise us is supposed to go down. It almost rarely comes to fruition. Not here now, obviously, since I don't have the ability to see into the future to say whether or not they let us down this time. But we have seen the usual ahead of draft moves, and it has been a busy day. MLSE has relieved Masai Ujiri from his position with the Raptors. John Tavares is re-upped with the Leafs. Noah Dobson has made his way from the Islanders to the Habs. There have been a couple other trades that have gone down. All of this on a day where the NHL has held a press conference to announce that they have a new CBA, but won't answer questions about their new CBA. Always fun to live in Gary's world. We're going to get into as much of that as we can here. We're going to try and keep it quick because, like I said, the draft is just a little while off, and, there'll be more news then. But this is always a newsy weekend. And with everything that went down on Friday, I was worried a couple things would get lost in the shuffle here before we get to the Monday show and what all that's going to look like. It's a crazy long weekend. It's not really a long weekend. Some of you guys have 4 days off. Some of you have Saturday, Sunday off, Monday work, Tuesday off. That sucks. Some people will work or have, a long weekend, have Monday off instead of Tuesday. Look, all of that is to say, I don't know when we're going to talk to you again. We'll be here. Will you? I don't know if you'll be here. And I would miss you if I didn't get a chance to tell you guys everything that I think right now. And I know you would miss that. As far as the beer goes, I am having an Entangled Dark IPA from the Lake of Bays Brewing Company. Our friend Angela Thompson, who was here earlier in the week, brought me, quite a collection of these. And they are amongst my favorite craft beers, certainly amongst my favorite dark IPAs. So we'll get into that. If you want to hear more on the craft beer front, go back and check that one out. It dropped on Wednesday afternoon with our friend Angela. And also, if you missed it, we had Graham Nichols on the show on Thursday. That dropped mid-afternoon on Thursday. And spoke to him all things Ottawa Senators. So that's up right now as well. We're not going to talk too much about the beer. You've heard me rant and rave about it before because I love it. And so you don't need to hear it again right now. And I'd like to see if I can keep this under 20 minutes. We'll see. You guys know I'm not always good at that. Like I said, there are some things to talk about. So let's get into the things. MLSE announced... This was kind of douchey, I think. You can let me know if I'm just being too hard on them. MLSE announced on Friday morning, or at least news leaked out from the usual NBA insiders on Friday morning, that the Raptors would be parting ways with industry giant Masai Ujiri, who's been running the organization for 13 years, brought an NBA championship to Toronto, very important. Equally as important, brought respectability to the franchise, brought stability to the franchise. And hang on to that word, because Keith Pelly used it a couple times, and he used it wrong today. Masai Ujiri has been a monster. Now, we talked before about in 2021 that Ed Rogers, when MLSE was negotiating their last contract with Masai, was pushing back hard against the idea that Masai had to stay. With the profile that Ujiri brings, he makes a lot of money, and there was talk that perhaps he was actually the highest paid executive in the NBA. Deservedly so. The guy is a very bright guy, a brilliant guy. He did a great job for the Raptors, deserved a raise, deserved to be near the top of the industry. And since then, it apparently hasn't gotten any better, the relationship between him and the Rogers side of MLSE. And as some of you may know, there really only now is a Rogers side of MLSE. I guess it was around last summer. We'd heard it was coming. I can't remember exactly the dates that this all played out, but it became public. The Rogers would be buying out Bell on their shares of MLSE and becoming, while not the sole owner, by far the majority owner and the controlling owner. And so even if that's not done at this point at a corporate level, things are being done the way Rogers wants them to be done. And so back in 2021, Bell wanted to bring back Masai, but not as they weren't over the moon about it. They weren't going to go to the mat over it. Rogers absolutely did not want to bring back Masai Ujiri, didn't want to pay him, didn't think it was necessary. And this will become a bit of a thing as we talk about the current state of presidencies amongst MLSE teams, didn't think that layer was necessary. Certainly didn't think that layer was necessary at that paycheck. It was Larry Tannenbaum, who was the third member of that triumvirate. He had less controlling interest than either Bell or Rogers, but Bell was sort of willing to go with him, and he was the board member, or not the board member, what do they call it there when they when they go to the Board of Governors meeting? Alternate governor. He was the governor for the Raptors, and he was able to use some NBA bylaws and stuff and to conduct a little shady business to bring back Masai and get his way and make sure it stayed that way. But the writing was on the wall. Larry Tannenbaum isn't getting any younger. There is a clause in his ownership contract that says within the next year or two they can push him out, and they will. And since then, they have also, like we talked about, pushed Bell out. So this is a Rogers show now, and Masai knew it as well as everybody else. Apparently, Keith Pelly said at his press conference on Friday, he's been talking to Masai about this for a couple months. Masai suggested after the draft would be the right time to do this. Masai has a good history at the draft. They were willing to follow him there and just not cause any disruption. So it is no coincidence that this was announced the morning after the conclusion of the NBA draft. But this is, make no mistake about it, the way Rogers is going. One thing that was interesting, if you pay attention to the chronology of how this is played out, Bill Manning, about a year ago, maybe a little more than that, he was acting president of the Argos and TFC, and they decided, yeah, you can go. We don't need you here. So they punted him out the door, and he was never replaced at TFC. Brendan Shanahan, a little while back, his wasn't necessarily a firing. His contract had expired, but they made it clear, we're not bringing you back. And they made it clear to the media at that point, we won't be looking to replace him either. One thing that is interesting at this one, while they fired yet another president, which would suggest we are streamlining this, we will have all of our general managers report directly to Keith Pelly. They did say they would open a search for a replacement president for the Raptors. Now, that could mean a couple of things. I anticipate it means a business guy for the Raptors. It will not be another big NBA name, a guy who's going to be highly paid. Rogers has already told you what they think about having highly paid presidents in the reporting chain or in the ladder of command, whatever you want to call it. Nobody calls it a ladder of command, but I think you understand what I mean. It won't be that. But could it be somebody on the business side who maybe knows basketball a little better, who will be sort of, take care of the business relationships around Toronto and corporate sponsorship that maybe is a little tougher for the NBA than it is for the NHL? Everyone wants to sponsor the Leafs. It's the big show in town. It's not hard to drum up advertising and marketing business and broadcast partners and all these sorts of things. I sort of anticipate they're going to bring in a guy who's just sort of a president in name only. And as far as the big stuff goes, Bobby Webster, the GM of the Raptors, will report directly to Keith Pelly as far as, team operations go. I could be proven wrong on this, but if you're following the breadcrumbs here, Rogers is telling you they don't value that position. They believe Keith Pelly can oversee all of these organizations and, don't need anyone else in between him and the general manager. One interesting thought on that is Mark Shapiro, who is entering his last year as president of the Blue Jays. I should say that differently. Is in his last year of his contract with the Toronto Blue Jays. We don't know whether he'll be back or not. I would say he's probably taken notice of the fact that his counterparts at all the other teams around town are being unceremoniously shit-canned and punted out the door. That, I imagine, is on his radar. Maybe he doesn't care. Maybe it is his expectation to move on at the end of this year anyway. Like, it won't be even up to Rogers or to the Blue Jays. Like, it's possible Mark Shapiro has a stature, whether you like him or not, within baseball, that there's been talk that, maybe he would be in the running to be the next commissioner. Maybe he goes and takes a job for now in the league office. Maybe he moves on to a different team. Or maybe because I've seen this in a few different, framed in a few different ways. It seems like Edward Rogers kind of likes Mark Shapiro. He keeps cutting pretty big checks for him and was willing to cut a few others. But when you look at the Vlad contract, when you look at the Skydome renovations, it now requires a reservation to go in and get a loony dog, I'm quite certain. The changes at, the ballpark down in Dunedin, he sort of opened up the checkbook for Mark Shapiro. And maybe, I don't know whether Rogers has plans to roll the Jays into MLSE to create some more, even if not going all the way that far, to roll in some more synergies and kind of put them under one kind of Rogers Sports umbrella, which the Blue Jays are under right now, like a Rogers Sports and Media umbrella with Sportsnet. I don't know how tightly he would be willing to go with this, but maybe he envisions a bigger role for Shapiro within all of these organizations. Maybe he becomes kind of the business guy for, the Raptors and the Leafs. And, he takes over a bigger chunk of that, not necessarily from Keith Pelley, because I don't think Keith Pelley is going anywhere. But if Keith Pelley is sort of going to oversee the teams and Shapiro would get a bigger handle or a bigger portfolio on all of these teams in a business sense, I don't know. I find it fascinating that Mark Shapiro has survived this long. And like I said, only a few months left on his contract. Maybe he's ready to walk. Maybe there's an extension in a drawer for him already if he wants it. Or maybe he's going to take on a bigger role in all of these franchises, which is fascinating. One thing that is never fascinating is a Keith Pelley press conference. The guy's only been here a little over a year. I'm tired of hearing him talk. And what's even more tiring is the number of people trying to pump his tires because he used to be basically everyone's boss. He ran TSN for a while. He ran Sportsnet for a while. He ran the Rogers Bell, I forget what they called it, the consortium. Bob McCown had it correct when he called it the Unholy Alliance, when Bell and Rogers teamed up to broadcast the 2010 Vancouver Olympics. He was a big part of that. Worked around this. Everybody knows this guy. They all seem to like this guy, and nobody seems to criticize this guy. So when you point out the nonsense that he spews at his press conferences, all you get is either deafening silence or media members saying that you don't understand corporate speak. Okay, it's 2025. We all have seen corporate speak. We understand corporate speak and how to have a press conference where you say nothing but talk for a really long time. We've all seen it. We're all familiar with it. And I swear, if one more person tells me that I don't understand that, I'll probably do nothing. I'll probably come back on here and rant to you guys about it. We get it. That's his job. That's what he does. But he comes out there on Friday afternoon and says this was his decision. And if you believe that for even a tiny second, I get to do it. Guys, I get to do it. You don't understand corporate speak. He did this for his boss, who has wanted Masai gone since 2021, didn't want to pay him anymore, made that clear. And now that Rogers has sole control over this, out he goes. And if you think that Keith Pelley, after 14 months on the job, less than that, because he says Masai and he have been talking about this for a couple of months, if you think after that short of time, Keith Pelley has come in and decided, I'm going to fire one of the most respected and highly paid and biggest profiles in the NBA on my whim alone and not the whim of Edward Rogers, you're crazy. And you don't understand corporate speak and how a press conference works. Oh, it feels good. I get why they do it. Look, Edward Rogers doesn't like Masai Ujiri, doesn't like paying Masai Ujiri, and saw a way out. And it's not necessarily like an unjustifiable position. The Raptors haven't been very good for a couple of years. Now, they appear to be trending back in the right direction. I'm not smart enough to know for sure whether this rebuild is going to be the real thing. I don't know basketball well enough. But most people seem to think the worst is behind them. A couple of nice draft picks. They've got this kind of turning in the right direction. So Masai can walk out the door. They can call it mutual. Love when they do that. It's always mutual. And Keith Pelly, I guess, is now going to be an NBA guy, which he's never been before. Will anyone question him? It does not seem like it. But I just don't see the... I just don't see the upside. And when he says we're going to hire a president for this, but not for the Leafs, the other thing that says to me is, hey, I'm a Canadian kid. I know hockey. I can run a hockey team. Yeah. Please don't do it. At least there's enough self-awareness there to go, I don't know basketball. I should bring in somebody to help with that. But you don't know hockey all that well either. Somebody who appears to know hockey reasonably well is, well, I hate to say it, the Montreal Canadiens. I love the trade they made on Friday as they trade 2 of their first-round picks. When I say 2 of, I believe they only have 2, but 2 mid-round first picks to get Noah Dobson from the New York Islanders and then immediately sign him to an 8-year, $9.5 million contract, which, again, I'm fine with. Look, Dobson's not coming off of a great year. Like last season or last year around this time, we were having totally reasonable conversations about that guy possibly being on the Four Nations team. And he didn't have a very good year this year, so obviously that doesn't happen. But that's the stature of a guy we're talking about, a guy with that kind of upside. And most of the insiders were telling us over the last few days when Dobson's name reemerged was, if you are trading for him, it's with the understanding that this is going to be an 8-figure deal. You're going to have to pay this guy $10 million plus. Well, the Habs didn't. And in all this talk, and look, maybe I overstate it. Maybe I do bring it up too often. I don't know. But I do believe that this tax thing is a bigger thing than the NHL wants to make it out to be. Tax-free states versus not. Quebec is not a tax-free state. In fact, I believe last we checked, it was highest in the NHL. And so to get this guy, I only bring that fact up to get this guy at 9.5 after hearing for weeks that this was going to cost them north of 10, cost anybody north of 10. Well, he just arrived in a very high tax rate province or jurisdiction, and they got it done for less than 10. That's a nice piece of business for Montreal. And look, I guess if you wanted to, you could make an argument that Montreal should have held on to those picks because I've kind of said for a while, as far as their rebuild goes, I don't think there's enough punch up front. They've got some really good looking defensive prospects, some of which have already arrived and won a Rookie of the Year. But I don't love what they have up front. And so this would have been one more chance, before hopefully you end up in the upswing to grab a forward prospect or two. And you traded them. First of all, you didn't draft forward prospects with them. You also didn't trade them for a forward to come in and kind of help boost you that way. That's the only part of this that I do find a little odd. Like, I think everybody sees what Lane Hutson is. I think a lot of people are very high on David Reinbacher. A lot of people, including myself, have thoughts on Logan Mailloux, but he is capable of slapping a puck around the ice. They have some depth on the back end. I'm surprised they wanted to use these assets to bring in more depth on the back end, but I do think Noah Dobson is a good enough player and a good enough bet for a bounce back that I don't hate it. I just think it's odd. Right, and that's the difference. I don't love this. I don't hate this. I'm closer to loving it than hating it. I think it's a nice pickup, and Dobson's still young enough that if you can go out and get a guy who can, be right-handed D, top pair if you want him to be, depending if you want to play him with Hudson. I like the acquisition. I'm just not sure it's how I would have spent those assets. But that's not what we're talking about here. And as Montreal does want to be, regularly back in the playoffs, they saw an opportunity here to get better and bring in a good player. And they went ahead and they did it. So, good for them. I got no beef with that at all. The Islanders getting those 2 picks are interesting. I'm not going to spend too much time on it here because by the time this is posted, it'll be basically the start of the draft or just before, and we'll already know whether they've been successful or not. But the talk is the Islanders want to flip these 2 picks into jumping up from the mid-teens to 4 or 5 and try and draft James Higgins, who was an Islander kid, grew up an Islander fan. Interesting to see the Islanders looking for the bed sheets and the pajamas thing. I thought that was uncool. Whatever. I'd be careful. Look, James Higgins, by all accounts, is a top 10 talent. I wouldn't blow my brains out just because there's a guy who grew up in a hometown kid, a fan of the organization. I think when you get sentimental like that, you can get into trouble. But they certainly have the ability now to do that if they want to. They have the opportunity. Also having the number 1 overall pick, they could get Matthew Schaefer. And then if they could get into that top 5 or 6, maybe they have a shot at getting James Higgins. And man, all of a sudden, that's a pretty nice injection of youth into, frankly, what was a pretty stale and stagnant organization. Starting to smell old and like mothballs, much like the guy who was running it. Anyway, nice piece of business there for the Habs. The Leafs have extended John Tavares $4.3 million for 4 years. And that is a nice piece of work for everyone involved for different reasons. Look, Brad Treliving had the hammer here. And you heard Rob and I argue about this a little bit. And Rob said, what if he just says he's going to up and leave? Then you got to let him go. At some point, the Leafs have to reestablish some control here. And if you can't do it here with a guy who already came home, already put his reputation on the line to do that, lived up to the 11-year contract, and has made it clear in the public, in the media, I want to stay. You got to push that guy. And if at the end of the day, we get to July 1st and he does get an offer for $7.5, maybe $8 million from somebody, and maybe he would have. Like, the guy's no worse than Brock Nelson. Brock Nelson got 7.5. That's probably out there for John Tavares. Then so be it. You let him walk. You can't pay him that. So Rob and I kicked this around a little bit. And I said, anything that started with a 5, as long as it's not a terribly long contract, I would be fine with. Because last year, we got this promise on the Chris Tanev thing. They're going to really spread out the years, give them, 6 or 7 years to really bring that cap hit down. Well, they gave them 6 years, and they did not bring the cap hit down as far as it needed to come. So that talk made me nervous. To see John Tavares put his name on a contract at $4.3 million for 4 years is a big win for Brad Treliving that he had to have. When you have the hammer, when you have the leverage, you have to use it. And it feels a lot to me like John Tavares pushed this as close to UFA as he was prepared to go, and probably somebody said to him this week, hey, when we get to the draft, we got to start making trades. We got to start making plans for free agency. Are you in or not? And showed him they were willing to hold the line here and not go all that high. And he would have said, all right. Because he wasn't leaving. He came home. He had 2 kids here. He set up his family here. The guy wasn't leaving. So you can let all the insiders run up and down and say, he's not going to stay for anything less than a 5. That sounds crazy. Chris Johnston was saying people need to get ready for it to be closer to 7. And not just saying it indignantly. No, hold the line. And so, power to Brad Treliving on this one. Because I'm not always a fan. Same guy who gave David Camp 4 years and Max Domi many years. Anyway, no, we're singing his praises today. He did a good thing today. We're happy with Brad today. And as far as we know, we'll never get inside those negotiations to see what John was asking for. And if the scenario that I just laid out, that it became clear the Leafs weren't budging and he said fine. Even if that's not how it played, maybe John said, yeah, I'm prepared to do this. I will take less than Matt Duchene. If you guys remember, for the last 2 weeks, I've been pointing out, I'm sure the Tavares camp was pointing at Brock Nelson and saying 7.5, please. And I'm sure the Leafs were pointing at Matt Duchene and saying 4.5 seems good for you. He took less than Matt Duchene. And again, he did it in a non-tax-free state. Matt Duchene got $4.5 million in Texas. John Tavares got $4.3 in Ontario. So regardless of how this negotiation played out, though, John Tavares, for the rest of his career, is the guy who finally said, I'll stay. I'll take less. I'll do the right thing. I'll take the hometown discount. I'll be the team-friendly guy. He lived up to his $11 million over 7 years contract. He did his part. And when it came time to have to nut up and say, yeah, we're not giving you anything close to that again. You're staying or not? He said, I'm staying. So even if he had to be dragged kicking and screaming in those negotiations to that point, which we don't know that that's what happened, maybe he was far more magnanimous than that. But regardless of how it played out, public consumption from here on out is John Tavares is the guy who came home and stayed home, took the discount, did the right thing, tried to show the next generation, you don't have to grab every penny. This is a great deal for his legacy and his popularity in Toronto, and it happens at the same time that the Mitch Marner thing is happening. There is no winning for Mitch Marner based on what happens in the first week of July. And we don't know what that is, and he doesn't have to care. But if he goes somewhere to win and takes less money to do it, Leaf fans will be furious and say, you wouldn't take less for us, fuck you. If he goes to a bottom feeder but that has a ton of cap space and grabs his 14 and a half, 50, Leaf fans get to go, fuck you, we knew it all along, you're all about the money, Mitch. And when he rolls back in, he will get booed and booed and booed. John Tavares, in the meantime, is the guy who, the aw shucks personality, quiet in the media, all this stuff. Yeah, I just stayed. I took less than 4. And it was the right thing to do. I love Toronto. I wanted to be a Leaf. All my favorite players grew up here and whatever. This has set John Tavares and his legacy up beautifully for a long time. Because it is happening at the same time that Leaf fans are creating a brand new villain. And now we got a guy to point at and go, be more like John. We never doubted you, JT. Let's have another John Tavares day in Toronto. Kudos to Brad Treliving for getting that done at a really nice number. And even if that means within a year or two, John Tavares is your number 3 center, the way the cap's going, that number, you're fine with it. You're fine with it. The guy's making less than what Jonathan Taves is going to make next year, and Jonathan Taves hasn't played in 2 years. And John Tavares just scored 38 goals and 70 points. It's a nice piece of business. I thought anything that started with a 4 was going to be a bonus. When I first started, your brain sort of reads ahead of you when you're reading the press release. You'd see 4 point whatever. I was expecting to see 4.9, 4.7, even 4.5. 4.3. Attaboy, Johnny. Love you, man. Good on you. Stay around, buddy. We love you. There was also a press conference. Hey, I mentioned the timing of that Raptors press conference, and I never circled back to it. Maybe now's the time. They scheduled it for 1 p.m. on Friday. And on the face of it, you're like, well, Friday news dump, maybe, not really. It's early enough in the day. It's not a big deal. But it is the day before the Canada Day stretch, and all the sports reporters are going off for their vacations and whatnot. But they did know that the NHL had scheduled a 1 p.m. press conference to unveil sort of a new CBA. And it was something, you guys may be familiar with this. Toronto likes the NHL a lot, so it's going to be paying attention to that press conference. So intentional, necessary evil, we decided to make the move today, and it just so happened to be at the same time as the NHL's presser. I don't know. And then a few minutes before 1 o'clock, you announced John Tavares is re-signing, which is also under that MLSE umbrella. Get as much of Toronto talking about anything else as possible before you say, yeah, that highly respected NBA executive, we're getting rid of him. Teams have been trying to poach him. I got to be done with this, but the Washington Wizards were going to try and lure him away in 2021, make him the highest paid executive in sports. He wanted to stay in Toronto, and he got his money from Toronto. The Knicks came knocking a year or two ago. There was talk about tampering, and they were asking for permission. They wanted to steal Masai Ujiri away, and now Toronto is like, yeah, you can go. It's fine. We don't need you. What's more likely? The rest of the NBA is all stupid in wanting him, or Rodgers has made a terrible mistake? Anyone who's ever dealt with Rodgers' staff before can tell you, I think it's possible they've made a mistake. So yeah, they had their press conference at the same time as the NHL, and right after they announced the John Tavares extension. Smart, douchey, but smart. The NHL press conference is the perfect embodiment of that meme that says this meeting could have been an email. This press conference could have been an email. They called a press conference with the head and the number 2 of the NHL and the head and the number 2 of the NHLPA to announce that they have reached an understanding, a memorandum of understanding for a new collective bargaining agreement 15 months before the current one expires. It's all great news. And then refused to answer a single goddamn question about it. That's why that's a press release. That is exactly the purpose of a press release. An email, in the analogy that I'm trying to make. Look, if you have got this done, you send out a press release and says, we are pleased to announce this and this and this. Our owners still have to, well, I was going to say vote on it, preferably read it first, but I don't know. Some of the people who own these franchises, who fucking knows? We have to ratify. And the players are like, hey, we got to let our membership see this and vote on it first. And then we'll ratify it. And until then, we don't think it's right to talk to the media about what's in the thing until we've actually let our membership see what's in the thing. Now, we think we all know what's in the thing anyway, because the owners were given a presentation a week ago on where things stood and how it looked like this was all going to play out, and a bunch of them came out and leaked to the media and whatever else. And God love you, because we like rumors and we like details and this and that. But to pretend that this is all top secret is stupid. And then to call a press conference and not talk to the press is stupid. All it was a bunch of backslapping and glad-handing and verbal filleting. It was nice to work with them, and oh, it's a great agreement, and oh, we have such a good working relationship now, and everybody's so happy. How many years is this one for? We'll talk to you later. Can we talk about the new contract structures or the playoff cap rules? No, we're not even saying that's what's in there. We'll talk to you after we show our owners. And look, allowing the people who are affected by the thing to see it first is a totally reasonable position to hold. But don't call the press in to say, nah, it's done, but we're not going to tell you. Fuck, I hate Gary. And that's alone isn't enough reason to hate Gary. But I do. I hate Gary. There were media members in this press conference doing their best to ask, I guess, questions about other things, the Olympics and TV deals and whatever else. If you're not going to talk to us about the thing you called us here to talk about, I'll ask you this, I'll ask you that, whatever. So some of the questions are directed. You know, this is to Gary or Bill on the league side. Why was it important to do this? What does it mean to do that? And they would go ahead and answer, and the PA would sit and they'd wait their turn. Then someone would say to Marty Walsh and Ron Hainsey, the two guys on the PA side, you know, what does this mean for the players and the membership, this and that, and what did you guys think of? And they'd answer. And then Gary, his condescending little prick, would step in beside, I also think for the players. I mean, no one cares what you think for the players. Oh, he's just a sniveling little shit. Go back. Well, don't do it. But go back and watch that press conference. Don't do it. Watch how many questions were directed at Marty Walsh and Ron Hainsey and the players, said specifically by the reporter, I'd like to ask Marty Walsh about how this impacts the Players Association or why the membership of the PA felt this way about that. And as soon as he was done talking, Gary would always say, and I also think this. No one cares, Gary. Please, I'm begging you, Gary. Please, shut the fuck up. I don't know. I may have had another thing or two to discuss as well, but I'm going to shut the fuck up. Sometimes the best thing to do is just take your own advice. And I'm getting wound up here. It's a Friday night before a long weekend. I shouldn't be. Gary sucks. That's going to be it. Like I said, Angela Thompson on Wednesday's edition of the show, talking all things craft beer. Thursday's edition, Graham Nichols from the Hockey News and the Coming In Hot podcast, talking all things Senators. And then we'll be back throughout next week to talk about free agency and whatever's gone on at the draft. We'll go from there. Anything else I need to? The usual. We're on social media at Talking Audio. Follow the pod wherever you're hearing us right now. And have yourselves a fantastic long weekend, no matter what shape it takes. And we'll talk to you next week.
That's it. I cannot work under these conditions. If anybody wants me, I'll be downstairs at McDougal. Call the weekend guy. I don't care.